In terms of the application of the Research Skill Development Framework, it was first used in 2005 in a large first-year human biology course. In fact, 2 consecutive courses, one in semester 1 and one in semester 2, by Eleanor Pearce and Mario Ricci. And we had a lot of difficulties ironing out the language of the framework. There's a lot of glitches in the way it was articulated. So over time, we worked out how to make it communicate in that context. But it wasn't until we had some electrical and electronic engineers in a master's course come to us with a problem. And we said, well, this is what human biology is doing. Consider using this framework. And they felt that if they use master's level electronic engineering resources, that they could actually use some very similar processes. The students would just be engaging at a more sophisticated level, but using the same 6 facets of research, and they'd be thinking about actually giving some much more guided, prescribed work early in the semester, and they're scaffolding these primarily international students towards more through-bounded to mainly scaffolded. They did try up to self-initiated, but it actually became a little bit too difficult in their context. But then, as soon as the electrical engineers started to use the framework, we knew that we had something that could work across several contexts, from human biology to engineering, from first year to masters. So then we started to get other people involved. We've got people in nursing, people in English, people in petroleum engineering, and we started to see an acceleration of people's use of the framework. Initially, it was all around assessment. So people were typically operationalizing the framework by generating the conceptual framework into a marking rubric. And you had these 6 facets of research. Sometimes people would specify levels of performance in accordance with autonomy. Sometimes they just use their grade descriptors. There's different ways of doing that. Some people would assign very prescriptive algorithmic sort of marking regimes. Some people would use it as a global measure and look at where the actual students were performing and make a globalized assessment and marks based on that. So early on, they became quite diverse ways of using the framework, even in terms of the rubric generation. Then, as we got more and more disciplines on board, and we're seeing greater diversities, for example, we've got the Bachelor of Media, there's an acceleration in diversity and of ways of using the framework. And people started thinking a lot more about the teaching and learning side of things, and how would you introduce these 6 facets of research, and giving examples where students' first exposure wasn't a marking rubric, because that sounds pretty boring, but it was actually giving them experiences where they get their teeth into things in socially dynamic ways. And examples of this can be seen on the Research Skill Development site, that students actually see stimulating material and discuss it, and then are prompted to think, what skills did you just use when you were doing that? How are you engaging? What were you doing? What were you saying? But what skills did you use? And students could typically actually just articulate those skills. Then we were thinking a lot more about how you would reanimate these facets of RSD. Just because they've experienced it in first year doesn't mean they'll even bring it to mind in second year. You can't just tell them about it again or give them the same experiences. So thinking about how to reanimate it. And then in some contexts, we started to see whole new versions emerge. From James Cook University, started saying, we're in work integrated learning. The term research doesn't work in that context. We're going to design a framework that's the same in character, 5 levels of autonomy, 6 facets, but we're going to call it the Work Skill Development Framework. Then we had other people starting to create clinical reasoning or clinical reflection skill framework for the clinical context. Then in engineering, we're finding that the RSD was working very effectively at masters in their 4th year of engineering, but not in the first 3 years. So we issued mechanical engineering tutors with a challenge of re-engineering the RSD so it would speak in an engineering context. And they developed the OPS Pentagon, optimizing problem solving. So they called it a problem solving framework, and a beautiful, simple arrangement and articulation of the 6 facets of problem solving. And it's a configuration we've taken up for the RSD. So we have an RSD Pentagon now, because it communicates something that's really beautiful to use directly in a teaching and learning situation. The students can use it as a reflective framework as they're building or as they're writing. So we're seeing a great diversity of approaches, and we're really looking forward to seeing what continues to emerge from University of Wisconsin-Stout and its sophisticated use of the RSD. Already in the blog, there's some really outstanding examples, and I'd love you to go there to see what's in that blog. Also, there's RescueDev, the RSD main blog. There's a lot of emerging ideas coming out from University of South Pacific. Has its own RSD site, which is very culturally aware, and to see how that framework is starting to take on really rich, culturally aware dimensions, socially aware dimensions. And so the framework is taking on its own different shapes and forms so that they're fit to the context, so it really communicates to us as educators and really communicates in our disciplinary contexts and especially really communicates with our students. So I wish you well as you consider the use of the RSD framework.